It then means we're moving on to Tara Gbolade. Now, Tara describes herself as an architect by trade and a passive house designer by passion. Her expertise in planning and policy saw her lead the Harlow and Gilston Garden Town Sustainability Strategy. She sits on several design review panels, including the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, Lambeth and Merton councils, where she advises on major planning applications. I would say she's one to watch, but I think she's already been noticed. She's a Reba J. Rising Star winner, and she's co-founder of the Gbolade Design Studios. She sits on the Public Practice Board as an alumni observer. She's part of the advisory committee for Guy's and St Thomas's charity Impact on Urban Health Initiative. And she's on the Architects Declare steering group. As if that wasn't enough, Tara is also a founding committee member of the Paradigm Network, which is the professional network championing Black and Asian representation in the built environment. Now, we're very, very lucky to have Tara joining us here today. It was going to be a flying visit. She's cleared her diary to ensure she can stay to the end. She has a really packed schedule because she's been shortlisted, or the studio has been shortlisted for the Young Architect of the Year award. So as soon as she's finished here, Tara will be racing off to the award ceremony to hopefully pick up a prize. We wish her the very best of luck. We're now going to hear Tara speak about some projects that she's been working on and how this embodied carbon works in practice. Tara, over to you.
Thank you so much, Eva. What an intro. I'm going to have to try and follow that. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I am now going to share my screen. And I will assume everyone can see that unless someone says otherwise. So I'll run in. The IPCC report has proven without a shadow of a doubt that our human activity has caused the rapid increase in the rate of climate change, particularly following the Industrial Revolution. I won't speak too much on the top image because I think Simon did a stellar job in doing so. However, we know that built environment, as Alexandra just highlighted, is responsible for almost 40% of our carbon emissions, including that surface transport, with 11% coming from our choices as architects and built environment specialists. And we know that now the alarm is well and truly rung. So therefore, what can we do about this? We as decision makers have the opportunity and the power to make so many more different choices and decisions, regenerative decisions. When pen hits paper, we are deciding if we're pumping more carbon emissions into the atmosphere. We as architects and built environment specialists make a myriad of daily decisions that either help regenerate or continue to degrade our planet. As a consequence, we decide the quality of life for our communities, our neighbors, and our families. So that's on us. And on that happy note, I'll talk through a couple of projects we're currently working on within the practice that describe how we make better decisions as custodians of our planet. I will highlight at this point that we recognize we are in transition, as me personally, as a practice, industry-wide and nationally as well. And so therefore, I think every win is a win and we should take that and build upon that. So today I'll be talking through Hermitage Muse, which is a small project in London, and another project we're working on in Brixton. I won't really be going through design in detail or approach, but really more about the decisions we've made along the way. So the red, as you can see, sort of highlights our current site. It's in Crystal Palace and it accommodates 8 new homes. There were no existing buildings on site. This is a set of terraces, or 5 terraces, a pair of semi-detached and a detached dwelling. And the scheme is currently on site. As a practice, we always adopt a holistic approach to sustainable design. Of course, this discussion is tailored to embodied carbon, but overall, we ensure that we're addressing aspects such as energy efficiency through to sustainable movement, through to green infrastructure, and that will hopefully come through as I speak today. The first thing we did, I should say that this scheme had planning by different architects when our clients brought it to us. And so the first thing we did as a practice was to decide with the client on a performance target. We find that these are critical, as highlighted in the earlier talks, these are critical for us to get off the ground. The client was good in listening to us, and we agreed on the RIBA 2030 climate challenge as a really useful one, mainly because of its simplicity as well. And I must credit the client for having the appetite and ambition for doing so. And it's important we recognize our role as architects and built environment specialists to influence decision-making. I will highlight here as well that we started with the process with many sustainability workshops to ensure that everyone on the team was upskilled as much as possible. And the scheme started with very high level sketches looking at operational energy separately from embodied carbon, even though we know they're all interlinked, and then through to the construction methodology that would work. I'll expand on these in a moment. The operational energy approach we're pretty confident about, and because we're not having that talk today, I'm going to skip over to our embodied carbon approach. We made a myriad of small decisions that we knew would have a larger impact further down the line. We explored initially because we had no existing buildings in sight, we explored initially the reuse of locally sourced brickwork, which is what we had at planning stage, but also the opportunity to potentially use lime mortar so we could ensure that the building was recyclable if we used new brick. This was abandoned due to curing time and additional programming time, but it's important to highlight that this is an aspiration that the scheme started with. We also looked at our structure and looked at the building and rearranged it in a way that meant that we needed less foundations so that the building itself was lighter, thinking ahead to what types of foundations that we were going to use. We also, right at the outset, got hold of the Field and Embodied Carbon tool and discussed with our clients what it meant with an overall target of 300 kg of CO2 emissions per annum if we use masonry construction versus timber. And you can see that we were trying to target that number of 300 there. And you can see there that initially we were looking at over 1,000 for that. But when we looked at incorporating timber in particular aspects, we were coming right down to 800. And because we had these numbers right at the outset of the scheme, it allowed us to make even more nuanced decisions, which means that as designed, we came down to 450. I'll now talk about some of the sort of structural changes or structural decisions we made that meant that we were able to meet these targets. First of all, we recognized that we were going to use concrete, but critically for us, we wanted to understand what type of concrete we were going to use. And so we specified high recycled content, so 70% GGBS, which is in effect a byproduct from the blast furnace used to make iron for the concrete that we were going to use. And we also used aircrete blocks basically for masonry. So it's a lighter product. It's a lighter product that we're going to use, which affected our foundations, but gave us the thermal value that overall we were looking for. Our superstructure, we transitioned and moved into timber wherever possible. So a lot of our beams, columns, party walls, the brief, if you like, to the structural engineer was to get rid of old steel and use timber. We knew that particularly for this scheme, it might not be 100% possible, but it was critical for us to try. And that really massively affected how much embodied carbon we were able to have in our building. So we're glad to say that a lot of the architecture and a lot of the CGIs you might see in a moment is reflective of this type of architecture that expresses itself with the timber that has been used. We also looked at the materials we'd ordinarily use, and specifically, for example, with the external walls, we looked at our insulation and using wood fiber, which outperforms the synthetic products, save for thickness. So it has better thermal performance. Of course, it acts as a carbon sink, much lower embodied carbon, and achieves the design, the as designed performance as required. Some of just images just highlight some of this is, for example, one of the timber themes that are exposed and expressed so the owner of the homes get to know the types of homes they're living in, which obviously we know addresses their annual energy use as well. And very quickly, I'll just end with sort of learning from that project and moving on. Here we were looking at a scheme in Brixton, or we're looking at a scheme in Brixton. And here the overall goal was going beyond doing less bad and looking for the net positive gain in everything we did. The scheme itself allowed us to do that, and the clients and occupiers we're working with allowed us to do that. So the scheme is in Brixton, and first of all, we have an existing building which is listed, so it will be reused. It has to be reused anyway, but we're upgrading that to NFIT standards. Attached to that are these extensions which we are exploring and ensuring are being designed for disassembly, because we explored different feasibility options, and eventually we decided, well, there's no reason for the tyranny of the or for the occupiers to have to choose between one versus the other, but actually have a building that has the ability to adapt and change with them and their needs over time, which means, of course, it's a longer lasting building and has a longer, more adaptable life. Again, right from the outset, we employed the Field and Craig Quality tool again, and started to see that because of the decisions we were making, it's mainly CLT as the structure, wood fiber insulation. This idea of disassembly gave us the opportunity to massively reduce and meet the RIBA 2030 climate challenge goals here as well. We looked at different materiality internally as well, so looking at cork and recycled timber. But to that, I just want to quickly touch on our moss. We decided to really explore how varying materials and the green infrastructure in and around our site play their part in addressing climate change. We know that moss will sequester and store carbon and cleans the air locally around the site, which is quite important because this particular site sits on a chin, which means there's a lot of vehicular air pollution. We looked at different types of brick, including stone cycle, which has 65% recycled content from ceramics. But we are looking at exploring K brick, actually, which was mentioned in Design, I think maybe last year, I think. And why this was the preferred choices for us is that it's 90% recycled brick, recycled from construction and demolition waste. But also what we found quite interesting was actually even the coloring of the brick was used is formed from recycled ink cartridges. So in conclusion, the more broadly we think about how we can all play our parts in addressing the climate emergency, and while we await policy in some cases to play catch up, we can certainly start to make better decisions now. Thank you very much.